Okay, I've done one thing right today, and I'll share the screen now somewhere. Hopefully, apart from my daughter's dog nibbling at my toes right now.
And you love
it. Say hi for us.
Yeah, he's got the cone head at the moment. So
just went to the
recovering.
Vet. Oh.
Okay, so look, what I will do is acknowledge that regardless of where we might be sitting throughout the state, that we are meeting on the lands of the traditional owners, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. All right. So again, in effect, today is a session around engagement, and I want to look at it from two aspects. It's the stuff of us going out, and it's also the stuff coming in. So in effect, what I want to focus on is that why element, a little bit about who your community actually is, and how we can actually go out and seek that engagement. So that first question, I'm popping to you. So off the top of your heads, completely cold, have a think and tell me what the largest road safety issues are for your road safe communities.
Understanding road rules.
Okay.
Is this for the actual committee or for the
community? The community.
For the community. Yep. Okay.
Yep.
Yep. Understanding road rules and obeying them.
Anyone else?
Navigating roads.
Lack of compliance during school times, the 40-kilometer school times.
Speed and hooning.
And that's you yourself, Jim?
Yep. Yes. The old hoon.
Okay, so what do you reckon my next question is going to be?
What have you done about it?
There's one before that, Jim.
Oh, okay.
How do you know?
How do you know? Good. So that's really the question that we need to come to, because it's all well and good us sitting there as a committee thinking we know it or contemplating that we know it. But the whole aim of engaging is to actually understand those issues and for us to be able to say credibly that these are the issues in our community as it relates to road safety. And I think that's something we often forget. So when we're looking not necessarily just at funding, but what I've put up in front of you is something from the Kellogg Foundation in the US that is a logic model around grant funding. And it starts with us, trying to understand the situation and then saying, these are the things we're going to put into it, and these are the things we're going to do. Okay, and in effect, it's saying as an output, we're going to do a workshop or a publication, or we're going to do a field day, or we're going to do a equipment, or it's a learn to drive program. And here's the people we're going to try and target, and that could be sliced and diced in all sorts of different ways. And then out of that is going to come some changes to the environment or the situation that we were talking about at the start. So even as an example for today, at the end of today, we could validate this by saying, okay, as a result of this engagement process, has there been a change in your knowledge, your skills, or even the attitude to go out and try it, or a motivation around it? Or are you at least more aware of what engagement strategies might be? Now, that doesn't mean you're actually going to put it into practice and go and do it, which might be the next step. So, I'll come back in 6 months' time and I'll ask you again, well, did you actually go out and do any of those engagement strategies? That's a different context. And then longer term, what we're actually all about is a change in the environment, a level of social conditions, or a change in economic or political context. And if we frame that around the other way, and we say that if we start with the end game in sight, that's what funders and that's what policymakers are actually interested in. That they're not really caring about what it is that you want to do. What they want to know is why should they support you to do what you want to do. And that's where that evidence base or that frame really becomes important for you to come out and when you were saying before about the lack of compliance with the 40 kilometres, that might be us just sitting by the side of the road with a speed gun.
Yes.
And saying that, on average in our community, 20% of drivers are not meeting that 40 kilometre road rule.
Yeah, that is correct. We have done that. Yes. Thanks, Richard.
Okay. And, because without that, we're just guessing and we're not really sure. So even though we might be able to test things and pilot things, it's another thing to get a better understanding about, as an example with those drivers, if we have then stopped some of those drivers who were speeding and asked them, why didn't you see the 40K sign, or why did you choose to disobey it? Or we're getting a deeper understanding, not just the fact that this thing is occurring. Okay, so really the engagement is trying to get a deeper understanding of the underlying, knowledge and behaviours that sit in our community. Does that make sense to people? Sort of give you an understanding or frame of why the engagement's really important? Okay, so the reason we need to engage with the community is it's to bring together their thoughts and perspective of what's important with road safety issues. And I should just put not just ours. Okay, so there's actually a base to it that we can stand there with a credible voice and say, here's our really important context behind what we're trying to do. So, as we talked about that volunteering one, you can see that I've used a credible state to say, here's an evidence base that we can actually utilise. So, in effect, what do we actually mean by community? So, I'm going to ask you to have a think about this and to write a couple of these down. But before you do, I'm going to say, we're talking about the topic of road safety locally. So it's in your community. And I'm going to define a stakeholder as someone or something that you make an impact on as a group, or someone, something that makes an impact on you. And I really want to sort of clarify that a bit. So as an example, if we say government, I can't reach out and I can't touch government, okay? I can touch the minister, I could touch an advisor, I could touch someone in the department, but I can't touch something that's really nebulous, like a word like government, okay? So I want you to have a think about that, and I'm just going to get you to try and write down 5. Okay, so that's either someone or something that you make an impact on, or someone, something that makes an impact on you as an organisation. So have a think about that and try and write a couple down. So let's maybe try and hear a couple of thoughts. Anyone?
School. We are targeting schools.
Good.
Patrick.
Very good, Ian. And again, I might differentiate. There might be 10 schools in my neighbourhood, and
Yes.
each one of those is individually a stakeholder. Good.
That is correct. And we are targeting now, because of the resources we have, or limited resource we have, we are targeting schools that are fronting arterial roads because lots of truck traffic. So we are
Good.
targeting that as a top priority. And then obviously other schools we'll target, later on. Because of the,
Very
I wish we
good.
have all the resources, but we don't. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and it's an important context that you bring in. I'll maybe flag that a little bit shortly. Very good. Any other thoughts?
Local police.
Good.
Well, I've got 3 if you want 3.
Go on, Jim.
I've got local press,
Yep.
the newspapers,
Yep.
the highway patrol.
Yep.
And Facebook followers.
Good. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I've got Sunraysia Mallee Ethnic Communities Councils as well.
Very good.
And then I've got a stakeholder group like motorcyclists.
Good. So to give you an idea of, and I suppose this also then hopefully answers that question about who are they and where do we get them. This is a list that we pulled together with Jim a couple of years ago. And I think, Ron, when we did it in Geelong, we probably got about three whiteboards full of them. Can everybody see that there's a hell of a lot, and some of them obviously are quite broad, but we've got everything, from taxi service right through to all of the service clubs. The fact that we've probably got event coordinators and organisers around festivals. Car dealers, all the schools, preschools, childcare, walking groups. These are all stakeholders in that whole issue of road safety, and yet we probably don't engage, I'm going to say, and I'm going to take a guess, probably deeply anyway, probably half of them. And for me, this becomes important because these are all potential partners for you to either be working with or engaging with, or at the very least, trying to find out and get their opinions about it. So it could be, you working with a men's shed on actually delivering a program, or it could be the men's shed doing a fundraiser for you. You've got all of the different ways that you could think from the whole gene pool of road safety about where you could actually be getting people. And I'm talking about this more than just the context of getting data and information and knowledge, because these are potential committee members for you or working group members for you. And we're not thinking a little bit more laterally about where some of these could actually come from. But to me, this is a major issue that's missing for a lot of community-focused organisations, is they often sit internally and focus internally without contemplating the potential for someone to work collaboratively with. Now, for me, I'm not necessarily saying you go out and start engaging with all of these, but your example of the schools and then focusing on those that front the arterial, this little chart gives us a capacity to actually do that stuff.
That's right. Yeah.
Because what we want to do is look at the influence of those stakeholders versus the interest of the stakeholder. And obviously the ones that aren't really interested and really don't have much influence, it doesn't mean they disappear off our stakeholder map, but we just keep them parked there to always think of as taking them into account. Whereas, if we take that and we break that up into the schools in your area, and some of them, which are the fronting arterial ones, we put more of our attention in, we manage closely. It doesn't mean the others disappear. And some, we might give them knowledge and advice, but it might be about awareness raising rather than specific programs. Others, we keep informed. We might send them our newsletter, link them into our Facebook posts. And the others, we contemplate when we're developing our programs and all of our services. So to me, if we go back to that, we could overlay, sorry, I've gone one too far. We could put those into each of those quadrants, okay? And again, we prioritize the ones that have got a significant degree of power or influence and those with high interest. And if that alone is too much, you can then take that one quadrant of manage closely and break that down even further. You could put 4 quadrants into the manage closely one and say, these are the most critical ones we really need to focus on. So you're not locked into just, a basic view of the world of that, but you can interrogate those even more deeply if you wish to. Does that make sense to people?
Yeah, very good way of looking at things. I think. Thanks for this table. I don't know what you call this diagram. Yeah.
And it just gives us a capacity to actually work within all of those stakeholder groups. And again, that doesn't mean that we go out and engage with them straight away, but it gives us a process of at least mapping them, understanding where they fit, and then whether we choose to or not, go out and engage or seek their feedback. So really for me, what are the things we really need to consider when we're looking at engagement? And to me, it starts with that really critical question of why you're engaging and what are the outcomes you're actually hoping for. What type of engagement are you planning? Is it a true consultation, or is it just trying to get views and perspectives and hearing of difficulties that they might be facing? Whether you want to develop a campaign, make decisions about how you're going to spend your budget, or build the capacity of, as Beck, I think, said before, some of the issues around motorcyclists. How much influence will the community be able to have? And I think the really key thing that you really need to be mindful of as it relates to engagement is you're not saying and going out that we're going to solve this problem, because it may not be in your control for that to occur. So don't go out and overpromise and then under-deliver, because that's what completely leads to disengagement thereafter. Does the method you're going to use engage people from the bottom up, or is it, through council, or is it through some form of partnership? How are you actually going to do that engagement? Is it friendly? How will it appeal to those whose voices are not often heard? And, I think we had the example before from someone about the Ethnic Community Council, or you know, it could be about one of our Aboriginal corporations or health centres. So looking at those that we don't normally reach and are difficult sometimes to engage with is something to think about as you're going through it. And how do you actually get good representative cross-section of the community? So sitting down and trying to think and look at that. What I haven't put in here is probably something that you should be aware of. In most of the local governments that you reside, there will be a component on the website that could almost slice and dice your community into about 1,000 different pieces. And that's a thing called ID profile. So it takes the ABS data and converts and analyzes it down to different community profiles. So if you're not aware of it, I'd really go and have a look on the council websites, because it's probably just sitting there and underutilised. Again, you know, do we actually need someone to help us with engagement? If it's a skill that we don't have, is there some training we could undertake, or is there some guidance we could seek from, you know, again, your work with local councils, and they all have community development teams who are all adept at community engagement. So again, working in with them. What type of facilitation do you need to make it work? And, you know, do you need to have a budget that, whether that's for, you know, paying for coffees and biscuits, or it could be a higher one about going out and actually doing some, getting some consultants to do that work for you. And at the end of the day, going out and knowing what you're actually doing and understanding what looks like a good result and getting it the most effective way that you can. So getting your word out, and for me, this becomes a really important one for you. And you want to be where the people actually are. So I think we're all largely time poor when we're doing our largely volunteer work. So we want to get the biggest impact for the work that we actually do. So where are the numbers that actually congregate together as part of your community? You know, whether it's a local farmers market or sporting events or you know, councils events or festivals that are held pretty regularly, or I'll put simply there, whether that's Bunnings, because, you know, there's so many people that just go through that, and whether they stop for a sausage or not, it's a place where a lot of people are actually at on the weekend, when, you know, maybe they've got a little bit more time than they would, say, at 5 o'clock on a midweek evening. So do think of that. And again, also think through the differing elements of whether it's younger or older people, and how you actually create that, you know. So could it be a game in a school context where you actually role play through something and you make it a game, so that they're more interested and more engaged than, you know, simply turning up and trying to do a mini lecture like a class lesson. And again, thinking about other elements of the population and working in with those organisations and situations that are currently there. So don't necessarily need to recreate the wheel. You've got so many elements that you've got that you could actually use, where people tend to congregate together anyway, and utilise those. Has anybody done any of those as a way of engagement?
Yeah, we've piggybacked on some community engagement events that the council have done. So they've actually gone around to different communities like Murrayville, and had an evening there, and, you know, had cakes and tea and stuff. And we've piggybacked on the back of it and said, you know, what are your road safety concerns?
I can remember at a, I think it was Paul Simon and Sting concert at, trying to think of the winery just outside of Geelong, Ron. There was a Roadsafe crew that had set up at the concert to breath test.
You mean like Mount Denise?
People on the way out. Yeah. And it was a really simple way of getting a message across that, geez, and I wasn't driving, but I still may have had a couple. And it was just the awareness of, oh my God, I didn't really think I'd be that close to that. So, just taking those examples, and there's, how many people would have been there that night? 10,000, 15,000 or so. So you've got a capacity for actually really strong awareness raising in some of those events. But, whether that's actually doing a survey or sitting down and having some deeper discussions with some of the people, it's an opportunity for grab them when they've probably got a little bit more time to spare.
Actually, we did this thing at Melbourne Cup Day. We went down to the race course and we did a plan B, and we had, what's your plan B? So if you're drinking, instead of driving, what else would you be doing? And the winner got a swag. So they got put into a little, box, and the winner of the plan B got a swag as a prize. Yeah.
I think you've got great opportunities to actually, piggyback on some of those events. So don't be shy on some of that stuff. So when we're going out the other way, what are some of the things we've got that we can actually utilise to get our word across? And obviously, there's all your flyers, whether it's direct mail or e-news or newsletters. The potential to hook into someone that's got some form of local celebrity, and again, choosing the right times for that. So Trishna, as we're talking about racing now, there could be a jockey or someone locally that might be ex of the town or now living in Melbourne or wherever it might be. It's rare that you're going to be doing telemarketing, but there's nothing to say that you couldn't do that if that was part of your grant submission, as an example. You've got all of those wonderful Facebook, Twitter, TikTok. Is anyone using TikTok?
No.
So who knows? Events or stunts, the lock up your CEO type stuff, and you've got different ways you can get those messages across. Obviously, face to face. Think of your partners, sponsors, or supporters. Open days, come and try. Jim, you mentioned before the local paper.
Yep.
But where there's courses or forums being held, could you actually hold an information session? Your physical service delivery events, whether that's Easter, stop, get your coffee. A lot of people tend to forget that radio is a great 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week option for you, that the community broadcasting stations are throughout the whole of this Australia. Why not utilise them? As well as the fact that there are capacities for you to actually get your community broadcasting service announced across, whether that's through the major TV stations or the locals, and that's the same on radio as well. But think about positioning of the things you wear. Could your Roadsafe group have a particular uniform or setting or colour even? Your own networks, tapping into those, your signage, of the physical word of mouth and everyone speaking about it. Beck, you've mentioned MPs and councillors, obviously. So that's some of your advocacy and networking with those stakeholders. Your logo is prominent. How do you utilise it? Where can you use it and how? Brochures, notice boards, even communicating your stuff through your fundraising and using those opportunities to actually get feedback, knowledge or support. Physical business cards for your committees, advertising your promotion, as we've just said, your local council, your pollies, but seeking and actively seeking feedback is critical. Consultants, your surveys and referrals. So you've actually got a lot of ways that you can actually utilise opportunities that don't cost you an arm and a leg? And are we actually using those as a way of actually seeking out that active engagement and getting feedback? Has anybody got any others that they tend to use? Beck's used press releases. Jim?
Press releases is one. The other one I was thinking of is email, how powerful email can be once you've targeted the right group or people that you want to participate to get the message out. I'll give you an example. When we're doing Senior Drivers Expos, we advertise in the local newspapers and on Facebook and things like that. But we also target senior citizens groups, aged care facilities, and we always include a pamphlet that they can print off and stick on their notice board. And it's surprising when you're taking the calls for bookings or and things like that. When we ask the question, well, how did you find out about it? You know, it's amazing how many said, "Oh, I saw it on the notice board in the you know, the leisure room or whatever they call them, type of thing." So, so that's just another example. That's all I was trying to think of.
I think you're right, and again, thinking the specialists in those fields. So I'm trying to think now that I might be able to see age group, and I've got my little seniors card. The seniors card, and maybe utilising those as a way of getting more messaging out to a targeted audience. You've got those capacities to actually link in with them for some of that story, content development, and also for their reach. So again, working collaboratively amongst the Roadsafe committees themselves, being able to convey to you know, because it is basic government service, for them to actually communicate the issues about road safety. Beck's mentioned text messages following an email works good. You can ask, they refer to the email that's been sent out for more info. I mentioned on here about your logo. So how often and how prominent is your logo in your email footer? You know, are you actually using messaging in your email footer? Because again, think of all the emails that get forwarded on every day, and the capacity to grab someone else's attention when it's not even the intended recipient that you've used. I'll come to the media element, because I think, Beck, you've brought it up as about media coverage, which promote events coming up. So this is probably a little tip as it relates to local media, and in effect, getting in before the event. So let's take Melbourne Cup coming up. And whilst it's not a statewide event, everyone across the nation stops for it. So in effect, we know that's coming up. And Eng, I've just noticed you got your hand up. I'll come in a tick. So we're now in October, and we know Cup Day, Cup Day is rapidly approaching. For us to get a story into, let's say, a local paper in November, what's the probability if we started today?
Yeah, you get it in.
Okay, so if we had a story ready to go, that, I don't know, Jim, we might have done something very similar to it last year, and we've got the story already filed, ready to go, and we might polish it up a bit, change the dates, the times, and whatever relevant, maybe change the picture. That will allow us a lot more time to be able to get in. And what we tend to find is people generally leave it too late for local media to pick up on a story, and when they publish it, it could well and truly already have been. So developing a calendar of regular events that are critical for us to actually piggyback on. So you know, what I normally say is think of all the things that happen in January. What sort of things occur? Well, you've got the Australian Open, you've got Australia Day, it's going to be hot. All of these elements that you know are going to be newsworthy, how and what can we do that link those to road safety? And what are the key messaging we want to get out? Because that's actually an opportunity for us to leverage for free a story about us, our organisation, and our key messaging. But it's not going to happen by chance. So developing a calendar across the 12 months of events in your community that you know will be newsworthy and that you can link key messaging to can allow you to build up a whole profile of stories over a 12-month period and really narrow on in a bit today, tonight. All you've got to do is polish the story and give the same messaging the next year. So once you develop and fill it, it's something you've as a resource that you can utilise it year in, year out, and save you a hell of a lot on a lot of energy after you get your messaging. Bex, James, you'd need to hit the bus now, follow up 3 weeks for the event, and then 3 days out. And you know, I think a really good opportunity for you to think about in terms of that calendar across the year. And you've got a question?
Just to build upon what you mentioned about that, currently the slide that you are showing, the different ways of engaging. Yep. So in the case of the electronic or social media, we actually touch base to your earlier point about external stakeholders. So there are some residents group who come together because they live in a particular neighborhood. So they have their internal Facebook group that inform those residents living in that same area about what's going on. So I'm in touch with them and let them know about some of the council project related to road safety in that particular suburb, so that then they can post those information I share with their Facebook administrator, so that they can disseminate that on our behalf. So that's just build upon what you just say about social media. Similarly, for the local newspapers, we have actually worked with our community services people or teams to advise some of the residents who are of diverse backgrounds, so they may not have the English as a main means of communication. So we actually target those. So we actually advertise through the local newspaper targeting those groups. So for example, we advertise in Vietnamese newspaper and also Greek and Italian, because we have a big group of those communities, particularly of the older generation who may not speak English that well or may not understand some of the material in English. So they rely on Greek or Italian or Vietnamese as a way of understanding what we are doing. So that's why we are targeting them as well. Obviously subject to the budget that we have. Thank you.
Yeah, look, Eng, I reckon it's a really important point that you're raising. And again, just to reiterate, and I'm not here as a paid party platform for community broadcasting, but you've got a huge capacity of particularly ethnic community programs on community broadcasting, in every little location. So again, thinking of that context, getting in and connected with community broadcasting could be a great way for you to communicate your messaging out to a broader audience. G'day, Carly. Most of the comments are coming from you. Beautiful. Sorry. I had Bex coming up from Beck's account.
I'm not sure why that's happening. Sorry, Pat. I think it's because I had to jump out and then I've jumped back in, and I don't know. I've just noticed that it's all coming from me. I'm like, oh, it's not. It's Carly.
And sorry.
No, all good.
I just to sort of maybe reiterate, particularly as it relates to online, and really, as we were just talking there with Ing, segmenting your audience and recognizing that some of it could be general communication, but being really clear of your messaging when you're particularly targeting whether it's an older population, a younger population, males versus females, and all of the segments that within that. So whether it's school age kids or youth age kids. So really being clear about the messaging and also the methodology that they actually tend to use. Being brief, you don't necessarily want to read War and Peace. Just be really short, sharp, to the point. Language is generally more relaxed, less formal. Think about the aesthetic of how you're actually utilising it. I don't necessarily want you to contemplate getting into all of the abbreviations of text, but think about how you actually communicate with your audiences. Think about imagery and whether that's videos or photos. What you're actually putting out is actually topical, that it sells as well as tells. So you want them also to come back. So how can I link that, and what is the messaging maybe to get back? You can use it to promote your events and your needs. You can run polls, you can run surveys, and think about how you could link those in with other, whether it's cross promotion through whether it was a radio broadcasting station or whether you print and other media. And as we've talked about previously in some of these sessions, about leverage some of your paid content as unpaid content. So if I'm going to run 3 stories in the local paper, what can they do quid pro quo to maybe support us throughout the year? Don't, and this is my pet hate with school websites, is if you've got something on let's say it's a website that's news, it generally news says not 1912. So you've got to keep that stuff updated. You've got to keep it current. Don't just put it there and think it's going to sit there, because it can actually work against you, particularly on something like Facebook. Think about if you've got an e-newsletter, whether that actually looks and integrates into everything else that you've got. As much as you can, how do I get someone who might happen to perchance on your Facebook page, and how do I get them into a broader supporter and a connector? And think about how you could build community through forums or blogs or podcasts these days, because a lot of that is newer and people are actually looking for something to do, particularly in lockdown. Okay, I think we've now worked that out, Beck. Look, I think, to me, as you can see with all of the stuff we talked about before in terms of stakeholders, that the thing that I think we're underutilising is the whole potential for more partnerships. And I'd really encourage you to look through that list. And I'm going to say, by no way known is that list comprehensive, because I reckon, Jim, we did that in about an hour in one of our sessions, would you say? Is that a fair summary? So, I reckon if we sat down collectively, I reckon if we sat down collectively and worked through all of the stakeholders of road safety, and I'm not kidding, that when we did it with Ron, it was 3 whiteboards full. So you start to add in things like funeral directors, and you do it across the whole spectrum of road safety, and you've got connections that you're probably not even considering and utilising at the moment. And I reckon I've got through in under an hour. I didn't want to do a whole sort of formal IAPT protocol about the spectrum of community engagement, but I wanted to sort of convey key messaging around it. If you're not doing it, it's a gap, and it's a gap that can be critical because it can pay off for you in so many different ways. And I know it takes time and it takes energy, but I think the example that Eng provided before of really thinking through and targeting an element that's critical rather than the whole tail gives you capacity to actually get more bang for your buck. If there was one thing that I could get you to do, it would be that. And then moving it into that. Because I think, as we've all indicated, as we've gone through these sessions, time is something we haven't got a huge amount of. So by being really focused on that engagement and managing the ones you really do need to manage, it's going to pay off for you longer term. Were there any questions? I'll stop sharing.
I've got a question. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, all good, Mary.
All good. I just going back to that screen that you just shared, I struggled a little bit with the concept of not having the two squares on the right-hand side actually on the left. And so I'm obviously thinking differently about them.
Hang on a tick. Let me try and put it back up. So that one?
So the manage closely, I would have thought would be if...
Oops, sorry.
You meet their needs, I would have thought would be if they had a higher level of interest and a higher power, as distinct from a lower level of interest rather than manage closely, for example. So I'm looking at the same height there on the power influence. Yep. But I would have put the pink one on the left and the orange one on the right.
Well, the manage closely one is saying that they've got a high level of interest and a high level of power.
But so are you saying manage closely is meeting their needs and doing more? Is that what you're saying? Okay. Because I just took the word manage closely as sort of just give them a bit of airtime, but not necessarily meeting their needs. Whereas the way you mean it is actually a little bit different. It's just, I guess, my thought of how the words were.
So in effect, if you think of it, that's our top focus is manage closely. They're the ones that we do as much as we humanly possibly can.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the next one is meet their needs. We might peel back a bit. Keep informed is yes, I'll use
keeping closely informed.
Let's say let's say keep informed is my Minister for Roads, and he's got a hell of a lot of power, but how much interest does he have? So I might alternate. I'll send him the email, send him the data and the information, and if something comes of it, all well and good.
See, I guess really what I'm saying is I've looked at those, and the word keep informed rather than keep to account. I would have taken them the level of intensity of work or attention would have been opposite to what you've said. So I guess it's how I've interpreted that, but I understand what you mean now.
It's also, Mary, and I should point this out, this is also a decision about disengagement as it is about engagement, because the context that we're putting ourselves in, we've got limited time and limited resources. So how do we get best bang for our buck? We're going to work on the ones that impact us and we impact on significantly. So the example I use about is disengagement. is someone that takes up all your time and all your energy, but you're not getting anything in return. So in those contexts, you're best to sort of try and disengage as much as you can.
Yep. No, good point. Okay, now that's satisfied my understanding. Thanks.
And again, for those of you that might have joined a little bit later, that doesn't mean that we put everything in the manage closely element as if it's just one amorphous mass. What we can do is break that down even further. And if I said, the ones on my screen, if I'm looking at it, at the very top right-hand element would be the 1% that we'd really need to invest significantly in. So even within the manage closely, we could, differentiate between some and the others. Does that make sense?
Sure.
I guess this is where some of that groundwork, building on from previous webinars where you're defining your purpose, some of that will help sort of capture, well, it'll help sort of define some of that engagement too that you're doing. Because if that's not part of your primary purpose to engage with, VicPol might be way up there, for example. It'll help define those stakeholders a little bit too, and that engagement.
And Beck, I should have said that can also ebb and flow depending on what time of the year it is. Like if suddenly it's bushfire season, well, we're probably going to have a closer engagement with CFA or MFB around some of those elements about, making people aware of what's happening when it's a bushfire day.
100%. Same with your events, and not that there's a lot of those happening at the moment in person, but same with those sort of things too.
Oops, sorry. Any other questions, concerns, comments? Beck, I don't know if that's you or
that's
Glenn
Carly. That's Carly's comment, not mine. Sorry.
That she's made the comment that bring your stakeholders into subcategory groups can actually identify the 10 groups or services you work with closely. Yeah, I think that's a real comment.
Yeah, Patrick, I just put that. I work in this space in community engagement across the state. This is what I do with all the stakeholders across all the industries that I work in. I have them on an Excel spreadsheet broken down into subcategories with the top 10 that I work with, 3 or 4 times a week. And then I break it down into the next 10 and the next 10. And then you're just keeping that flow of communication constant. And then they're working for you. You don't have to do the hard yards because they're already cross-promoting your program, event, or whatever.
Yeah, I reckon it's a really relevant point because I think what you're aiming to do is to be the expert in your field. Okay, so if you now think of that story that you have got in a local context, and let's say it's using Eng's example, the 40 kilometre school zone issue. Now, we might be talking about that locally, and we might get a story published in the local paper, and the journo might remember us. But then when there's a significant issue that happens at a federal or national level, if we're positioned as, in effect, the expert on that subject matter, they're not going to go to necessarily VicPol or someone else. They're going to come to you because you're positioned in the journalist's mind as the local expert about road safety. And that then feeds off each other, and you're getting that recognition locally, you're getting that promotion locally, and you'll be getting the support from the media. So do think about how those sort of things can actually play off for you. Okay, so I'm in your hands. Any other questions? thoughts. Anybody else got any tips?
Patrick, I'm hoping to get some tips from everyone here regarding conflicting position from different external stakeholders when we go out and engage with them. So navigating this is quite a challenge. So any tips or any advice from anyone here will be appreciated. Yeah.
Do you, maybe without necessarily talking about specifics, have you got a context within which you could frame that in?
Yeah, it's not, yes. For example, when we're trying to do a road improvement project or a road safety project, especially in Meramodong where I work, the council where I work, our roads are not very wide, so we can't really widen the road or make something safer without taking away some road space. So we try to improve safety for cyclists by having a bicycle lane, but in order to do that in some of our streets, we have to do away of some of the on-street parking. And obviously, if you try to push that through, those who have vested interest to maintain the status quo, let's say maintaining the on-street parking, will then have a different position when we engage with them compared to those who are very keen to get on more cycling improvement on the same road space. And so it becomes contested, and then we get almost a polar position from two different groups, and it's difficult to navigate that space because we can't do both. We have to do one or the other. So just picking on the brains of everyone here to see whether you have a magic bullet or a silver bullet for that.
Yeah. Any thoughts, anyone? No? Look, maybe if I could offer some thoughts. As much as humanly possible, this is where your expertise and knowledge comes to the fore. So you can only provide as much knowledge and information as that is available. And I suppose the pandemic is a very good example of this. We can give as much evidence as humanly possible to some people, and they won't take that as being factual. So
very true.
I think with all decisions that come most ways, you've got to have your courage of your convictions and be able to convey the reason why you've chosen one path over another. I think not an easy task, but all you can do is, as Viva said today, you consult, you can provide engage. At the end of the day, a decision still needs to be made, and a decision does mean that everyone's a winner. I've got a little green paper template that I always put at the bottom: who wins, loses. And I think in the decisions, we tend to forget that the losers, some of the decisions we actually make. And, how do we mitigate the loss is probably the tactic that I would probably defer to, but it's still a loss.
Yeah.
I think what you don't want to get into is an argument about a loss. Just accept that and understand and acknowledge it and move on. Okay. Well, look, I'm going to wrap it up there. Again, we have got the recording, and that'll be made available hopefully tomorrow, Beck. So I'll try and get that done tomorrow, and we'll send that out to you via a link, as we've done with the others. I also might chuck in another couple of attachments, particularly as it relates to the protocol around community engagement, and it's a little bit more reading. And I've got a little paper there from one of the software providers as it relates to engagement, and I think it's a pretty good paper around it. So it's probably about 7-8 pages, but again, it'll be a good little resource for you to maybe consider.
Thanks, Pat. That'd be great. We'll share that.
All right, we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
See
Thank
everyone.
you.
Hey,
Bye.
Patrick.
Thanks,
Bye,
Pat. Thanks for
everyone.
tuning in, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.